forming, and then, an ulceration happens. That happens with age. Something breaks off, and then a chunk of this thing will move down the blood vessel, and it'll keep moving until it hits a blood vessel small enough that it can't move anymore. And then everything beyond that dies. Whether it's in the brain, whether it's in the heart, whether it's in the gut, whether it's in your kidneys, it doesn't matter. It dies. And they're all infarcts. So you can have an infarct in the brain. We call that a stroke. You can have an infarct in your kidney. You can have an infarct in your gut. Your actually bowel loops will rot away. And it's usually fatal if not caught early on. So atherosclerosis, it's many faces. Limbs, bowels, neck, again, everything, it can be affected. So we can get an ischemic gut just as easily as we could get a stroke. So again, some of the things is some of the terminology. So stroke, heart attack, angina. Angina is just a medical term for chest pain. So as your heart is giving you problems and the arteries are getting narrower, you're starting to have chest pain, and you may get sweaty and short of breath and nauseated. And when that happens, you need to go to the ER. Don't call me. Don't call your doctor. Just go to the ER, because if you don't, you might die. Okay, that's an emergency thing. So intermittent claudication. Intermittent claudication is when the arteries down in the legs start to get plugged up, and you're not getting enough circulation, so you can walk so far and the muscles in the legs get tired because there's not enough oxygen for them, and you have to sit down and rest. So people that have bad claudication can walk a half a block or a block. They have to sit down, and then they get rested because the blood, what little blood is going down there, circulates enough. It gets the lactic acid out there, gets more oxygen down there. They can get up and they can walk another half a block or a block. These people need surgery. They need a bypass to get past the clot in order to fix that so they can walk again. And then gangrene is kind of the end result. If we don't do anything with intermittent claudication and a clot breaks off and it goes down and gets stuck somewhere in the foot or the toe turns black, it gets very painful, and they have to cut it off because you can't save it. Okay? So these are just some of their terms. Femoral arteries are in the legs, renal arteries are in the kidneys, the aorta we talked about, coronary arteries, and so forth. So, fatty streaks lead to atherosclerotic plaques. Plaques narrow arteries, they restrict the blood flow, leading to ischemia, which again, a restriction of blood flow, angina, chest pain, dyspnea, which means short of breath, abnormalities on stress testing, acute coronary syndromes can arise in this situation. And you'll probably be seeing a cardiologist. So this is what a healthy artery illustration looks like. It's able to carry oxygen-rich blood easily to the heart muscle, and the heart muscle responds well by beating wonderfully and healthfully and never giving you any problem. But a damaged artery, on the other hand, you can see the restriction of the blood flow in here. And, you know, believe it or not, two facts. One, the first sign of a heart attack in 40% of people is sudden death. Okay, so it's not something to mess around with. And two, when we restrict the blood flow like this, we begin to see about the time it gets to about 50% restricted is the time that it's most dangerous. That is the most likely time that a clot is going to break off from that plaque and travel further down the line, leading to a stroke or heart attack or ischemic gut or whatever. So when it gets really narrowed like this, and it can actually close all the way off, and some arteries do that. Why they don't rupture and break, not sure we have a great handle on that, but it can actually just close up too. And if it does that here, then everything beyond there is going to die. So that's the other way that you can get a heart attack or stroke. So when we look at ultrasounds, this is a normal artery. You can see it's got a nice healthy structure to the walls. You can see that the lumen, the opening in the middle, is quite nice. This one here, you can see plaquing in here, pus pockets, all kinds of things are restricting the blood flow. This is the lumen. And this is the same artery in a different body. So that's the difference between an atherosclerotic versus a healthy artery. So again, some more abnormals here. The light, let me just kill the light for a second. You can see here how closed up these are. Little tiny lumens in here. There we go. So myocardial infarction is a scientific term that we use to describe a heart attack. So myocardial means heart muscle. Infarction means that it's had an ischemic event, and so it no longer receives blood flow and it dies. So that's myocardial infarction. So cholesterol, pus shards exposed to circulating blood. Blood tries to repair the damage by clotting around it. Clots form, occludes the artery. That region of the heart is starved for blood flow, and it dies. So we commonly call that a heart attack. So again, another blocked artery. It may form a clot made out of platelets and blood products rather than just breaking off or restricting completely. So that's another way that we can have a heart attack. There's lots of ways to kill you. There's only one way to save you, right? So most heart attacks occur with clots that are 30 to 50% range. From clot rupture, it's more rare than a heart attack occurs with completely occluded artery, but it still happens. For folks that exercise, by the time an artery becomes occluded, collateral circulation has developed. And this is how we're fearfully and wonderfully made. So if we go back up here, let me go to here. So we have a clot here. But in people that exercise well, they have little blood vessels wandering around out here, feeding tissues that come off of here. And eventually they'll connect, and they'll form collateral circulation around that clot. And so that's what we're talking about there. And that prevents them from having a heart attack because they exercise. Is it a perfect thing? No, not always. I hearken back to Jim Fixx. I don't know if you remember him. Some of you may be old enough. In the 1970s, he was a journalist, very overweight, very heavy, decided to lose a lot of weight, and actually became a world-class marathoner. And he was great, set world records, all kinds of stuff like that. One day on one of his workouts, he finished up, and just as he's going in, he keeled over and died of a major coronary, dead before he hit the ground. So it's not perfect, but it is better odds than the alternative. So again, another picture, kind of a slice of the vessel, looking at a clot and how the blood hits it. The progression of coronary artery disease, up until about 70% occlusion, there is no symptoms. And when I listen to your heart with my stethoscope, I don't hear any problems in the carotids, in the heart. There's no what we call a bruit. Bruit is the noise it makes when we have it narrowed enough. It's like a garden hose. When you're out in the yard and you kink it and it makes that noise, same thing. We hear that in the heart vessels. We hear that in the blood vessels, in the carotids. And that tells us when we hear that, we're at least 70% occluded. So it's time for you to go get an ultrasound and see the cardiovascular surgeon. So it becomes symptomatic at that time. What kind of symptoms do we see? We begin to see dizziness. We see people pass out. We get headaches, visual distortions, all kinds of things can happen when we get to this place. So you go to the doctor and the doctor says you have atherosclerosis. Now what do you do? So according to the Occluded Heart Trial, OAT for short, they always have wonderful little names for their little research projects they do, 2,166 patient trial that supports lifestyle and prescription treatment as being just as effective as angioplasty with less adverse outcomes. So what am I talking about here? Well, this study showed in 2,166 patients that if we put you on a vegan diet and restrict your fats, give you some medicine to control your blood pressure and lower your cholesterol, you will have a better outcome than getting an angioplasty done. What's an angioplasty? Angioplasty is when they put the catheter up into your heart and put a stent in to open it up. What happens when they do that? When they put a stent in and open it up? Well, sometimes, because there's plaque in there, it breaks little pieces of plaque off. Where do they go? They go further downstream, and if they go far enough, they could end up going to the brain, causing strokes and other adverse effects. It's not uncommon when people have stents placed that they notice that their mentation isn't just quite as good as it was before. And that's the reason why. That happens in 1 to 7% of those that undergo an angioplasty. In my mind, if you're at a big center where they do a lot of them, you're probably closer to the 1% range that it's going to happen. 1 out of 100, maybe 2 out of 100. But if you're maybe more out in the sticks somewhere where they don't do as many of them, you might be closer to 6 or 7 out of 100. And for me, that's pretty risky. 6 out of 100 chance that I might lose part of my brain. So I'm not sure I want to go there, but that's how it is. So do we really want to do angioplasty? Is that really the way to treat this? So the COURAGE study, published in New England Journal of Medicine back in 2007, 2,287 patients with stable angina. So remember what angina, that means chest pain, right? So they have stable angina. Stable angina means that their chest pain is predictable. They do a certain amount of exertion, they get chest pain, they take 1 nitroglycerin or they take 2 nitroglycerin, the pain goes away. And that's the pattern every single time. It doesn't change. That's called stable angina. Versus unstable angina where he's been taking his nitroglycerin, now it's not working. Pain's not going away. You just became unstable. So here in these patients, compare with medical therapy with angioplasty, same kind of study. They're looking at, do we get better with medical therapy or do we get better with angioplasty in subjects with more than 70% occlusion, so they're pretty well occluded. After 4.6 years of follow-up in the 2 groups were identical in their incidence of death or heart attack, about 19%. So whether you do an angioplasty or whether you do the medical treatment, it doesn't seem to make any difference. So why are we doing angioplasties? Hospitalization, stroke rate were also the same. Angioplasty had a lower revascularization rate. What does that mean, revascularization? That means that the blood flow goes back into the tissues and keeps them healthy. So that doesn't happen as often than it does in the medical therapy. And despite acknowledging that angioplasty has not shown a benefit, cardiologists continue to recommend the procedure based on a belief that it actually helps patients. Why do we do that? That's one reason. I believe that's one reason they do it. But the other reason is because when the patient leaves the hospital, their chest pain's gone. And they're happy about that. My chest pain is gone. So is it worth it, though? So lifestyle change and atherosclerosis. It's time for some good news after all that depressing bad news. I shared this slide with you, a little different color format the other night. Difference between the Western and vegan diets. The Western diet is more than 40% fat, made up largely of animal products, where the vegan diet is 10 to 20% fat with no animal products. When you eat 2,000 calories of animal diet, the Western diet, our gut is so efficient, you're going to absorb about 95% of the calories, meaning that out of 2,000, you're going to absorb 1,950 calories, whereas in a vegan diet, because it's plant-based, because the nutrients are so tightly held to the fiber in the foods, and because our bodies are still pretty efficient, we're only going to get about 75 to 85% efficiency absorbance, meaning that you're only going to absorb 1,500 to 1,700 calories of the same 2,000 calorie load in a meal. Your average cholesterol in the Western diet will average more than 200, whereas with a vegan diet, typically we see it below 130. And by the way, 160 is pretty much kind of the benchmark that we recognize, where if you're above 160, you're laying down plaque in your arteries. If you're below 160, you're not. Okay? So, and of course, the Western diet is predisposed to the diabetes, the hypertension, the coronary artery disease, obesity, cancer, autoimmune diseases, where in these people, they live 6 to 15 years longer, extended life, healthy and happy without heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So why wouldn't we all want to become a vegan? So, and I showed you this a couple of times. Again, this is a study where they took people with high cholesterol. They put half the group on an animal protein base, and that protein is casein, which is the protein in milk products, versus a vegetable protein, which the protein was a soy protein. They checked their cholesterol 3 weeks later, and we saw this diet was so much better than what people were eating. They actually got a drop of about 30 points. But we see in those in the soy-based protein group, and this is protein. We're not talking about cholesterol. We're not talking about fats. We're talking about protein. What effect did protein have on our cholesterol? Well, these people dropped about 70 points in the same 3 weeks. I can't even give you a cholesterol-lowering medication that works so well. But they thought, well, maybe these people had a genetic advantage over these people, so they swapped the diets in the group. And the animal protein now is the plant protein. The plant protein is now the animal protein. We see it kind of levels off. About 40 points is about as good as you can do on a really strict Western diet. That's lots of oatmeal, lots of vegetables added with your meat and stuff like that. You're only going to get about 40 points. But in the vegetable protein group, after 6 weeks, we see a drop of about 110 points. It is pretty typical. So I've seen patients drop multiple times, 110 points, 110 points. Some people only go 80 or 90. Some people will go 150, 160 point drop. So it varies from person to person, but on average, about 110 points. And so does that help us? When we lower our cholesterol, do we have less atherosclerosis? Well, yes, because there's no product in there to inflame the blood vessels to cause the atherosclerosis. So I want to talk about the lifestyle heart trial. So the lifestyle heart trial is very interesting. The question was asked, can lifestyle changes reverse coronary artery disease? That's really what we're moving towards. Okay, so I do the medical route, I do the diet route. What's going to be the outcome? Well, here we didn't even do medicines. This is no medicines. This is what happened. Can it change? Can it reverse coronary heart disease? This was published in Lancet 1990. It's a prospective random controlled trial to determine whether comprehensive lifestyle changes affect coronary atherosclerosis after 1 year. So that's the time frame. 28 patients assigned to the experimental group. They were in a low-fat vegetarian diet, stopped smoking, stress management training, moderate exercise. And 20 were in the usual care group, meaning they're going to get aspirin, statin, blood pressure control medications, and that kind of thing. So remember, the blood pressure, the medicine group worked out about the same in the angioplasty group in the previous study. Remember, we looked at that. But here we're looking at what about the difference between medicines and no medicines, just using lifestyle. So what do you think happens here? So this is very, very interesting. And by the way, the low-fat vegetarian diet is less than 10%. This is the Dean Ornish plan. And Dr. Ornish was actually the one who did this study and had this published. 195 coronary artery lesions were analyzed by quantitative coronary angiography, the gold standard of checking these things out. Experimental group, average percentage diameter stenosis regression, 5.5% relative, and 16.5% reduction in the progression after 1 year on a vegan diet. What does that mean? That means that the plaque not only is stabilized, but it's reversed. And so one of the things I don't know if I've told you this story, but I had a nurse in my office, and one morning she was a little late for work, and she ended up over in the ER at about 5 o'clock in the morning with chest pain, sweaty, nauseated, not feeling good. And so they found out, oh, you have angina, and it is cardiac related. And so they gave her a whole bunch of pills, and she came to work and she said, she was crying, I don't want to take these pills. And so I know that you do this, and I've never really bought into it. Help me. Help me do this. And so we put her on the New Start program. Within 2 weeks, her chest pain was gone. 2 weeks. No medicine. She didn't take any of it. 2 weeks. Stabilizes the plaque, and then they begin to regress. So when only lesions greater than 50% were analyzed, we see the experimental group, average diameter, 11% regression. In the control group, progressed, went forward 16%. I'll show you a graph of that here in just a minute. So the lifestyle heart trial overall, 82% of the experimental group had an average change towards regression. That means 82% of the participants that did this, their heart disease was reversed. That's pretty good. We never see that with medication. I can't give you a medicine that's going to reverse your disease. This is not going to happen. So comprehensive lifestyle changes may be able to bring about regression of even severe coronary atherosclerosis after only 1 year without the use of lipid-lowering drugs. So in 1998, Dr. Ornish went on and published a 5-year follow-up of that study. And what do you think happened? It just got better and better and better. So the main outcomes, adherence. So we had to make sure people were adhering to the plan. A lot of times it happens, people get on the plan and they feel great for a while and then they slip back into their old habits. It's a real problem when you're trying to measure these kinds of things. So one, we have to look at adherence. How well did they adhere to the diet? And 2 results. The experimental group, 71% of patients completed the 5-year follow-up. So we got 71% who followed up and maintained comprehensive lifestyle changes. Whereas the control group, the 75% of them completed the 5-year follow-up, made more moderate changes in their lifestyle. And so what happened? Experimental group average percent diameter stenosis at baseline decreased 3.1 absolute percentage points after 5 years, a 7.9% relative improvement, and it's 37% reduction in the progression of coronary artery disease. 37%. How much does that open up your arteries so that you can have a healthy heart? Controls average percent stenosis increased by 11.8%. So there's got narrower and narrower and narrower. 25 cardiac events in 28 experimental group versus 45 events in the 20 control group during the 5 years. So remember the time that it's most dangerous for these people when they're between 30 and 50% stenosis anyway. So we haven't gotten them back to where they're less than 30% yet in 5 years. But look at this. This is what you want to see. So this is just the adherence rates over here. But here is the experimental group. Here's the control group. These are the people. 1 year, 5 years, you can see that they continue to progress in the narrowing of their arteries, whereas the experimental group, those on the vegan diet with less than 10% fat, continue to regress and regress 37.5% after 5 years. So in a literature review done in the Journal of Family Practice in 2007, assessment of lifestyle changes were made, and the ones most likely to change outcome are those with weight loss through low-fat diet, exercise, alcohol cessation, smoking cessation, and meditation, an important part of your health. According to Heart Healthy Times, a newsletter of the New York Presbyterian Hospital Prevention Cardiology Program, smoking cessation, regular activity, weight loss, replace saturated fats with mono and poly saturated fat. Where do you get those? Those are plant-based, right? Eliminate all trans fats. Where do you get trans fats? Margarine, stuff like that. So yeah, trans fats. Those are the ones where they took a vegetable fat and they hydrolyzed it so it would get hard. And so those are your trans fats. And tastier. People like the taste of that. Decrease the consumption of simple carbohydrates. Alcohol minimalization or cessation is even better. Is found to increase HDL. HDL is the good cholesterol. That I remember this when I was first starting into medicine, because H means happy cholesterol, versus LDL, which is lousy cholesterol. So happy or lousy. So the LDL is your bad cholesterol, total cholesterol, and a decrease in coronary artery risk. So it seems like the studies are stacking up in our favor. So food versus lovastatin. So lovastatin is a commonly used statin, although it's an older one now. They're using more of the atorvastatin and rosuvastatin. Background adult treatment panel, ATP3, that's their cute little name for the research group. The National Cholesterol Education Program emphasizes diets low in fat, high in plant sterols, viscous fibers. American Heart Association recommends the use of soy foods and nuts. See, we already know this. We know it about cancer, we know it about diabetes, we know about it with heart disease, but still, we keep doing angiographies, angioplasties, and all of this to what end? It makes our health care more expensive because these things are fabulously expensive, and they have a worse outcome. So objective, compare a diet combining all of the above factors with a statin in regards to lowering cholesterol. So design them. So there's three groups: low fat plus lovastatin, low fat, high in plant sterol, soy protein, viscous fibers, and almonds. So the intervention period is 1 month for all group, and the outcome is measured by lipid levels and CRP. So CRP is an inflammatory marker that your doctor will sometimes order to see whether or not you're having a higher or lower risk of heart attack coming on. So when we look at the food versus the lovastatin, the low-fat diet, 8% drop in LDL, 10% drop in the CRP, plus lovastatin, 30.9% drop in the LDL, 33% in the CRP, and combo, or just lovastatin, combo diet, 26.6%, 28.2% drop in the CRP. So it seems like we didn't do as well here, but when we put the combination together, it did quite well. But do we want to put up with the risks of the statin and the diet versus just taking our time and doing it naturally with just the diet? So, EPIC study. The EPIC study, I mentioned that last night, is the big nut study that was done in Europe. Hundreds of thousands of people, just following them on the amount of nuts that they eat and how many bad outcomes they have, like heart attacks or stroke. 4 groups: minimal, none or rare consumption; low group, 1 to 4 grams a day, less than 12% coronary artery disease versus the minimal group, so 12% less. So if you don't eat nuts at all, you're in this group. If you eat a minimal amount, you're in this group. 12% reduction in coronary artery disease, that's pretty good. If you eat a moderate amount of nuts every day, it goes to 16% less coronary artery disease when compared to the minimal group. And the high group, 24% less coronary artery disease versus the minimal. And that's more than 13 grams a day, which is more than our handful of nuts that we typically teach through New Start. So it seems like it's never ending. The more you eat, the better it gets. So the greatest cardiovascular effect is with tree nuts. Tree nuts. Europeans tend to eat tree nuts, walnuts, almonds, hazelnuts, whereas Americans tend to eat peanut butter. Is that a nut? No, peanut butter is a legume, right? So best protection is from Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Sweden, UK, and Spain, where tree nuts predominate. In countries where peanuts predominate, the benefits were far weaker. So potential mechanisms, they were, why is this? What's happening here? Backed by supporting research included cholesterol lowering effect derived from the plant protein and fiber, and we now know the sterols as well. Antioxidant effect of nuts rich vitamin E content. Nuts stimulate the release of arginine, a precursor to nitric acid, Nitric acid promotes endothelial function, which allows the blood vessels to open up, lowering your blood pressure and reducing the risk of that plaquing. So eating nuts also promotes satiety. So satiety. So that leads to low obesity rates. So reversing diabetes, 88 diet was compared to vegan vegetarian diet, 99 types, type 2, 49 followed vegan, 50 followed the ADA. The vegan was 10% fat, 15% protein, 75% carbs, and the results, 43% of the vegan group reduced their need to take drugs to manage diabetes compared with 26% in the ADA group. Is your head spinning yet?
Yes. What's the ADA group?
American Dietetic Association. Or diabetic. It's American Diabetic Association, sorry. So weight loss averaged more than 14 pounds in the vegan group compared with less than 7 pounds in the American Diabetic group. LDL dropped and averaged 21% in the vegan group compared to 11% in the other. Measured blood sugars improved more significantly in the vegan group than those in the ADA diet. So the ADA diet was the big diet that really came along just before vegan really came out as a big deal. And so that was the common one. So Dr. Neil Bernard, and he writes a book called Reversing Diabetes. If you're interested, very good book, very helpful to help you reverse your diabetes. The diet appears remarkably effective, and all the side effects are good ones. You know, with the keto diet, you can get kidney and heart disease and die from kidney failure. That doesn't happen with this. They're all good side effects, especially weight loss and lower cholesterol. He is a researcher. He's also, I think now the chair of the diabetes care, dietary care or something like that group at George Washington University. So he's a big deal. He's one of the world's foremost authorities on diabetic nutrition. So are we really designed to eat vegan? That's a great question. So they did a study in Nature Genetics looking at the copies of genes that produce amylase. Remember we talked about the cracker in the mouth, and after you leave it there long enough, it starts to turn sweet. That's the amylase doing that. So how many copies do we have versus other vegetarian animals? So we know there are vegetarian animals out there, and so we take a look at this. So starch digesters are the primary digestive enzyme of vegetarian animals than in lesser primates that are considered vegetarian. The average human has over 3 times as many copies than fruit-eating apes and monkeys. Even among humans, cultures that are more vegetarian have more copies of those animal products as a chief component of their diets. Look at the difference between Japanese and Eskimo, for example. And so what we see, remember we talked about genomics, nutrigenomics last night, and how your food affects your DNA and how your DNA affects your food. Well, here's an example of where our diet affects the DNA and changes the amount of copies of the amylase gene. So conclusion, humans are designed as starch eaters. We are designed as starch eaters, not meat eaters. And that's why we get disease when we eat meat. It's because we're not designed to do that. Our body can't handle it. And so disease is the end result. It's just like if you get in a Cessna and you put regular gas, car gas in it, and you try to take off, you're going to crash. Okay? It's just not going to fly. You got to put the right fuel in the airplane to make it go. Same with our bodies. You have to put the right fuel in our bodies to keep it healthy. So, that is it. Do you have any questions tonight? Yeah.
Yes, I wonder if we have too low the cholesterol could affect some part of the body, like the brain.
Oh, that's a great question. What happens if we have too low of cholesterol? Is it possible to have too low of cholesterol? There's been some great speculation on this. I haven't seen any really good studies yet because I wonder when we're giving people all these statins and we're driving their cholesterol down below 70 if they're having problems with some of the hormones in their bodies, because cholesterol is needed in our body, just not too much of it. What hormones? Well, things like testosterone in males and estrogen in females are all cholesterol based. And so if we don't have enough, then we could have some hormone imbalances. Again, I haven't seen any great studies. It's just speculation on my part. But yeah, I would like to see that work done. Yes?
What happens if your hormones are too low?
Well, then everything goes out of whack, right? So how many of you females have had some hormone imbalances in your life? You know what happens. So breast tenderness, vaginal dryness, loss of libido, the list goes on and on and on. And so weight gain, weight loss, depending on how imbalanced, which way it's imbalanced in. So there's a lot of metabolic activity that's tied to the hormones in our body. So what about if we lower the cholesterol with a vegan diet? Aren't we going to maybe have the same effect that happens with a statin? Maybe, but we tend to not go that low with a vegan diet. We don't need to. It reverses the atherosclerosis without having to drop it down below 70. So, any other questions?
Is it true that the brain is mostly cholesterol?
There is cholesterol in the brain, and it's part of the sheathing that happens to protect the neurons that are in there. And so cholesterol, like I said, is a very essential part of our body. We need to have it. But what happens when we get way too much of it? So it plugs everything up. We don't need that much. And the body manufactures all it needs. So you don't have to eat cholesterol to get it. Just it'll convert fats, plant sterols, into cholesterol. We have mechanisms in our body to do that. So, yes.
When it comes to oil, there's how much, as you were showing the blood before and after someone who had a lot of fat or oil, what about plant fats like avocado or nuts, the fat fats? Is this playing detrimental?
Yeah, the sterols, yeah, they're very different. That's another great question. So does the plant sterols have the same effect as cholesterol or other fats, trans fats in the blood? And no, it doesn't. Two things to keep in mind, though, is that when we're eating whole plant foods eaten whole and using oil sparingly, we're putting far less into our body anyway. So we have to deal with as much of that. When you eat a pound of steak, you're eating, 40, 50, 60%, depending on how lean or how fat it is. That is just cholesterol and fat. And so you're putting a great deal, if it was, say, 50%, that's half a pound of fat you just ate. And that's going right into your bloodstream. And I would never think of using anywhere near a half a pound of olive oil in any of my cooking for anything. So, anyway, anybody else? Yes?
Yeah, I heard there's different kind of diabetes, like either low in sugar and high in sugar.
Yeah.
And also, what's the best food to avoid migraines?
So two questions here. Two types of diabetes, type 1, type 2. There's a mixed type now. And so we tend to think of the type 1 being more autoimmune, whereas the type 2 is lifestyle related. And so I wouldn't want you to go out of here and treat your type 1 diabetes, taking away your insulin, thinking that this diet is going to keep you safe and healthy, because they're two different diseases. We're talking about type 2 diabetes in this seminar, which is the lifestyle-related one. And then the second question you had was?
What's the best food to avoid migraines?
Yes, food to avoid migraines. So there's a lot of really cool research going on with migraines right now. And the latest and greatest thing are foods that are high in riboflavin. Okay. And even a riboflavin supplement is showing to reduce the frequency and severity of migraines. That's vitamin B1. So, okay, yes.
I heard somebody say that cantaloupe should be eaten by themselves with nothing else. And somebody else I know won't eat vegetables in the same way that they eat fruits.
I get this question at every seminar, and that's great. I actually heard that it was all melons, not just cantaloupe. all melons should be eaten separately. And the chemistry behind that I'm not real clear about, but the idea is that it can cause a lot of disruption in the gut when you mix it with other fruits or vegetables, or even some grains. And there's some chemistry in there that gives you bloating and gas and discomfort. And so to avoid that, it's better to maybe eat that stuff separately. The same thing goes on with the mixing of fruit and vegetables. And some people are more sensitive to it than other people. So I wouldn't say that this is an ironclad rule, but if you're sensitive to that, you should probably avoid eating fruits and vegetables together. It disrupts the gut in the same way, in that there can be interactions in there that produce a lot of gas and discomfort for some people. So, yeah, okay? Yeah, I've read that. So, any other questions? Yes?
What could be more dangerous in the blood, the cholesterol or the triglycerides?
Oh, okay, that's another great question. So what's more dangerous, triglycerides or cholesterol? And so I'm going to speak on this from personal experience in that I have a genetic type that makes tons of triglycerides. Now, I'm not sure if I was born with that because neither one of my parents seemed to have that problem, but what I do know about myself is that I'm an athlete. And I have been an endurance type athlete, hockey player, runner, endurance skier, things like that. And what that does is that causes the body to store more glycogen and build more triglycerides, because you need those to break down into sugar to keep the fuel going for long distances. So a lot of endurance. But if you stop running, you stop your athletic endeavors, your triglycerides go way up. And some people have thousands. And what that does, two things. One is the triglycerides will be converted more handily to cholesterol, elevating the bad cholesterol over the good cholesterol. And two, it thickens the viscosity of the blood. So remember early on we saw the video with the before and after fat. The triglycerides will do that just as handily as will the cholesterol. So they're kind of two different fatty acids, two different kinds of fats, but they have a very similar effect in roundabout ways. So that's why in a lot of people that have cholesterol and triglyceride problems, just aerobic exercise will lower that. And do you know, while we're on this is a quiz question, what type of food causes your triglycerides to elevate? Fruits, yes. Simple carbohydrates and fruits, yes. So one of the things I figured out, and it took me a long time because there's no real good literature on this, but I used to love drinking lots of fruit juice. And so that would just send my triglycerides sky high. So when I cut out the fruit juice, I don't eat candy, I don't eat cookies and stuff like that. I just loved fruit juice, and so I would have, and I was thinking it's very healthy for me. But then I end up with these high triglycerides, and it took me a long time of experimenting, figuring out what lowers my triglycerides. I had a cholesterol triglyceride tester right in my office, so I could check myself every day. And so I learned very quickly that by avoiding that, my triglycerides drop down. So if you avoid simple carbohydrates, you can lower your triglycerides. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned that if you stop your long distance running and stuff, suddenly then your triglycerides will go up because you're no longer needing them, so you're storing them. So the suggestion to me is that you don't just stop suddenly, you work
your way down.
Work your way down.
I'm going to just put a caveat on that. That's what happened to me.
Okay.
Okay. So I don't know if that's going to happen with everybody. Again, there's not a lot of good studies on this topic, but it makes a lot of physiologic sense in my mind as I think through the process and what's going on here. So, yes.
So shall we give up our fruit salad every morning?
Oh, no. Just make sure you walk it off, right? And what is the best time of day to eat simple carbohydrates or fruit? In the morning. Why is that?
You have a lot of activity during the day, so you can lower that.
Well, you do have all day, but there's a physiologic reason that you want to do that. So after a good night's sleep, 8 hours of sleep, your adrenal glands kick a whole bunch of cortisol into the body, and it speeds up your metabolic rate. And so you're going to burn those calories a lot faster in the morning than you would in the evening. So, okay.
What's triglycerides again?
So triglycerides are a fatty acid chain. So they're a little different than cholesterol, but it breaks down very simply into glucose. So the body's able to break those chains off real quick and convert them into glucose. So it's kind of the endurance runner's food source while they're running. So same thing happens with complex carbohydrates. So complex carbohydrates are great for you. So not all carbohydrates are bad, just the simple ones. The complex are very good for you. They'll break down all over the whole day and give you energy all day long. That's why granola in the morning or some whole grain is really good for you. It will keep you from being hungry most of the day. So, yeah. Yes?
Yeah, it's a personal experience. Many times in the morning, I go out, I jog a mile or so, and many times when I don't feel like doing it, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm too tired. Maybe I'll skip. And then I tell myself, no, let's do it. And invariably, I feel a whole lot better at the end of that jog than
Yeah.
I did at the beginning. It's
Yeah.
like, wow, I needed this.
Oh, I know. And that's really, I think most of us that exercise regularly, so, you start to get a little burnout in your exercise routine. It's good to have some change up, being able to do something else rather than do nothing. And, you get to the end of your 10-mile run and you're like, man, I feel so good. I wish I'd do this every day. But boy, getting motivated to do that 10 miles is a whole nother story. So.
I feel good because, okay, I went 10 miles, I'm still alive.
I'm still alive. Very good, yes.
Do you have any thoughts on the interaction between the body and the spirit in terms of this food on the
Yeah.
spirit and the spirit's?
Yeah, actually, the lecture I was going to do tonight actually addresses that. So, but yes, we're a whole being. We have a spiritual component, we're mental, we're physical. And so they're all linked together. And so when any one of those components are off, the body is not healthy. And I had mentioned the other night about the guy who's really physically fit, all buffed out, works out at the gym, runs miles, whatever, and he's got a great sense of humor, wonderful personality. He goes home and he beats his wife and kicks the dog. This guy is not healthy, right? He's not healthy. We're whole beings. We're whole beings, so yes. Any other comments, questions?
Do you know if any of it's harder to measure the spiritual aspects of the effect of the spiritual on the physical? Is that kind of why it's sort of a little more nebulous? It's hard from a medical expert perspective to sort of address these things.
Yeah, I can't talk to my patients and say, well, you need more spirituality. You're tanking over here, you just can't do that. And so that's not a place to go. But it is a place to discuss. And so, how's your spiritual life? The patient will tell you.
Right.
They'll tell you what they're doing, what they're not doing. One time I did a seminar like this, and we were scheduled to fly out early Sunday afternoon. And so I did a talk in the morning, and I had about a 2-hour block of time before I had to leave to go to the airport. And we thought it would be real fun to let people come up. I'll be a temporary educator doctor, and they can tell me their problems. I can give them, a solution for it. 24 people signed up. 24 people in 2 hours, and I was like, Lord, what am I going to do? How do I do this? Right? That's a lot of people. And so the Lord put this idea. And so I brought the first person in. We sat down. We prayed for just a short prayer together. And I asked them what their problem was. And the next thing out of my mouth was, which of the 8 natural laws of health are you breaking? I let them tell me what was wrong. And interestingly enough, even some of the most strict vegans it was a church group, And so even the most strict vegans in our group, they're breaking some of the 8 natural laws of health. And we got right to the bottom of the problem within minutes. Next patient. And I did that through all 24 patients, got done in less than 2 hours. Yeah.
Self-diagnosed.
Yeah. And they figured it out themselves. I'd helped them figure it out themselves. They could see what was wrong. And then the next time we went back, we readdressed that. How did you do with making corrections to your life? We see improvement. So, yeah. So it's a great thing for you to do. We went through New Start. We spent a lot of time on nutrition, but we saw exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, air, rest, trusting in God. Those are the 8 natural doctors. If you're having a health problem, talk to God about it and ask Him, where am I failing? What of the 8 natural doctors can I do to correct what's going on with my health?
That's good.
Okay? All right. Any other questions? All right, very good. You guys are awesome. Thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed the seminar. It was probably more fun for me than it was for you. I really enjoyed doing this. So just have a blessed evening and a great life. So you're more than welcome.
Thank you very much. I think I'm gonna go totally vegan.
Praise God. That's what we need to do.
Anything else sweet and just the natural stuff.
I didn't even mention that cheese doesn't grow on trees. Praise the Lord.
Yeah, we need to get more word of mouth advertising.
Yeah. I think if we do this more regular, that will happen. That's what happened when we did in Soulsbyville. We were doing one like every 3 months, and people were ramping up for it, you know, and we had cooking classes and things going on in between. So there was always this constant flow of people coming in, and they invite friends. Man, you got to come and see this, you know?
Yeah,
And so,
yeah. This is your forte, you know that.
God is good.
More than any other study that you do. This is
yeah,
your thing.
that's what God keeps telling me, but why I like prophecy so much. I get it. All right.